Welcome to General Aviation Manufacturers Association 2021 State of the Industry Press Conference. Thank you for joining us. My name is Andre Castro. I'm the Director of Communications at GAMA. I would like to quickly go over the agenda for today's press conference. First, we will start with the release of the 2020 year-end billing and shipments information for the global general aviation industry. That will be followed by some brief industry updates. We will then host a panel discussion with industry leaders. We will wrap up with a question and answer period. We ask that all questions be submitted through the chat function of our platform, which can be sent in at any time. I would like to now hand it over to our next set of presenters, GAMA Chairman and Senior Vice President of Dahir Aircraft Division and CEO of Dahir Aircraft and Kodiak Aircraft, Nicolas Chabert, and GAMA President and CEO, Pete Bunce. Nicolas, the floor is yours.
Good morning, bonjour, bon dia. Thank you everyone for joining us today. It is an honor to serve as chairman of the General Aviation Manufacturers Association, which represents more than 120 of the world's leading manufacturers of general aviation airplanes, rotorcraft, engines, avionics, components, and related services and technologies. We are truly an international association, and I'm following the lead of my compatriot, John Rosanvallon, who was chairman in 2011, 10 years ago. I sincerely wish everyone is doing okay and you keep yourself safe. This is the first time we have to go on a virtual meeting for the state of the industry. I sure miss you all. Not fun to be in an empty room. Fortunately, Pete, Andre, and Mike are here. Thank you, gents. I will be presenting the 2020 year-end shipments and billing numbers of the global general aviation industry. We will start with the piston airplane shipments, which were very stable at 1,312 deliveries when compared to 2019. It is significant to note that in 2020, we saw the first certified electrical aircraft delivered in this segment. Piston airplanes billing now declined 7.3% from 2019 with a revenue of 716 million. If we look at the distribution, North America once again has the largest market share. For the 6th year in a row, the Asia Pacific market is second, which highlights the demand for pilot training in that geographic market. The need for pilots is still high, and especially for younger pilots, so just wanted to pause on that. I was very impressed to see that in the US, student starts is actually 3% high in 2020. It's almost 50,000 students as we speak. So these shipments are probably going to last for quite a long time. Moving on now to the turboprop airplane shipments, a segment that I intimately familiar with. We see that shipment decreased 15.6% from 2019. What is interesting, and I'm glad of that, the single engine turboprop segment did perform slightly better, the negative 11%. This represents $1.4 billion in turboprop airplanes billing for 2020. North America again is the largest market share, followed now by Europe and Latin America at a close to even with 14.4 and 14% respectively. Business jet shipments. We see that shipments decreased 20.4% from 2019. If we look at the billing, we are just at 17.9 shy of $18 billion in the business jet billings. But we also have to note here that the forecast for that segment was predicting a negative minus 25%, so it's getting much better with that 15% drop from 2019. If we look a little bit at the distribution now of the jets, you can see that the three segments are differentiated by takeoff weight, and we see some declines, but I would say that things are handling very well on that side of the market. You can also notice that There's a nice conversions that were made for the weight in kilograms, so thank you very much, Andre, for that. The distribution for the jet market, as you can see again, North America is 66%, so two-thirds of market share, followed by Europe at 16.7%. Moving on now to the helicopter shipment, we see that piston helicopter shipment decreased by 20% from 2019. The billing was $60 million just for the piston helicopter billings. And if we take now the next slide for the turbine helicopter shipments, which is the core of the market, we also see that the primary shipment decreased by 16.9% from 2019. However, I'd like you to know that in 2019 we have a shaded segment. This is the upper light blue that you see on the graph, where Leonardo's fourth quarter numbers are only going to be reported later in mid-March. So we expect this number in 2020 to go up. So therefore, the decrease is going to be less than 16.9%. If we move to the billing, there were $2.7 billion in billing for turbine helicopters. Again, 2019 shaded segment in Leonardo's fourth quarter numbers that will be reported in their 2020 last quarter figures by mid-March. I must say that these figures are not representing the level of demand, which stays very high, and are more driven by our ability to deliver as a global industry. As we all know, we're facing new constraints beside the one that have to do with fighting the pandemic and keeping our employees safe. But we also are seeing, and we raise the concern of the supply chain constraints and also border restrictions that we are seeing that can slow down our ability to deliver aircraft or to have people take delivery of the aircraft. Our industry is resilient, has always been and still is. I'm very optimistic for 2021 and cannot emphasize again the importance of general aviation to the economy in general, but as an economy on its own, as an industry on its own. It is also an industry that I very much am passionate about, and I think that the investment that can be placed into our general aviation industry is good now, but also for the future. That concludes our presentation of the 2020 shipments and billings data. I would like now to turn the floor over to Pete for some industry updates.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And my job today is to continue on that theme that Nicholas just talked about, and that's the resilience of our industry. When we all gathered here at the National Press Club, and we're supported by this fantastic staff that we have here, last year we were all gathered in one room, and it was a packed audience, and I looked out at all the friends that we have in the aviation press and the larger general aviation audience. And being here today in an empty National Press Club really brings home how important that human interface is, particularly within our industry, where it's a small industry, everyone knows one another, and everyone really appreciates that human-to-human contact that we have. So to all of you, our best regards, and it can't happen too soon that whatever show we can all be back together again, that we can shake hands, bump elbows, whatever we're able to do, to be able to go ahead and look each other face to face and not virtually, and be able to continue on with the relationships that have been built over the years so strongly. When we were here together a year ago, none of us could have predicted that factories would be closed down for up to 6 weeks, that business aircraft, jets and turboprops, couldn't be used to conduct business. They either couldn't get across national borders or simply there wasn't business to conduct. Our rotorcraft couldn't operate out in the energy sector because energy, the whole market for energy, had simply collapsed because everyone was shuttered. At that time a year ago, we were just hearing reports out of China of something going on with a virus, but we had no idea what was ahead of us. But then, as the lockdowns progressed, as we started to figure out how to work both federal, state, and local governments, and at the international level, national authorities, and manage through that period of time, we were able to start to crawl our way back. As Nicholas said, the supply chain was a primary concern. But for us to be able to start producing product, we had to be able to also install and keep the maintenance functions going on the fleet that we had. We're very proud that we have partners with the Aircraft Electronics Association, and Mike Adamson is with us today during this broadcast to provide us the details for their sales. And remember that 2019 was a banner year in avionics. We were just approaching the mandate on January 1st, 2020 of the ADS-B mandate, so that was a very robust market. So total sales did decrease a bit last year, and we had, during this period of time, a shutdown pretty much in the second quarter. But Q3 sales started to crawl back about 5.9% compared to Q2 and increased 8.5% in the last quarter over Q3. So the overall split in the sales of the $2.2 billion delivered in our avionics industry, the retrofit market about 56% and 44% for the forward fit market. So the avionics industry is recovering. Now during the pandemic, our factories, whether or our maintenance groups, and no matter what part of the industry you were involved in, the decisions were tough. Executives took pay cuts before employees took pay cuts. We had to do layoffs, we had to shutter factories, and we had to come up with innovative solutions to be able to manage within our production facilities as the supply chain started to slowly recover. We had to build teams. We had to be able to do contract tracing within factories. We had to build workstations where we could have the distancing required, build shields between workstations where they were more compressed, and really did extraordinary actions to be able to get this industry back running. And hats off to all those involved in our industry to be able to come back as quickly as we did and restore manufacturing to the limits of what we could do given the supply chain constraints. But during that period of time, we also did other activities to support this global pandemic. When we had to distribute equipment around the globe, our companies stepped forward, put their hands up, and started delivering packages, delivering medical workers. And if you'll advance to the next slide, you can see our chairman moving medical personnel, also using some of his equipment to be able to deliver packages. Our vice chairman's company using their CNC machines to be able to develop ventilator products to be distributed in Brazil, and many of our other companies going immediately and transferring production to developing PPE gear for all of our critical frontline workers. So really hats off to this industry, and so proud to be a part of it. It kind of reminds me of the stories you read of the quick retooling as we approached World War II, when the democracies of the world really started going and focusing on production and pivoting auto manufacturing to aircraft manufacturing and other areas. And that just shows that during tough times, like during the pandemic, our industry doesn't stop. Again, resiliency. We had a lot of entrants during 2020 that entered into the marketplace across the spectrum of products, from jets all the way down to the first electric aircraft. And this is exciting times. And not only were these airframes being delivered, but they had very, very advanced technology on board these aircraft. Some new capability tying into the autopilot systems that actually allows an occupant that's on an aircraft to be able to hit a button and the aircraft will land itself if something happens to the pilot. Tremendous advances that bode well for the future. And that future is really looking bright. If you look at companies that are working on new aircraft designs, and as we start to look on the horizon of electric propulsion, if you'll advance to the next slide, you will see that there is innovation across the board. Since we met together in February of last year, GAMA has added member companies across the spectrum of products, all the way from the large end business jets down to new companies that are developing this new area of electric propulsion. Also on the maintenance and supply chain side, we're gaining companies. So even despite all of the challenges that the pandemic threw at us, we were able to go and add these member companies and be able to help this global industry recover and then thrive. Next slide, please. So if you look at just the electric certified aircraft that are in development at this time, it is just daunting when you look at the number of different design ability that this industry has to be able to come up with innovative products. And whether these are propelled by pure batteries, hydrogen fuel cell, or being able to have hybrid propulsion using fossil fuels, each one of these has design freedom that makes this as exciting. And I know you've heard me say this before, but this must have been what the dawn of the jet age must have been like, because it is truly phenomenal, the number of new aircraft designs that are going through the CERT process all over the planet right now. And that's why our job is so important, to be able to work with regulatory authorities and to be able to go and leverage the bilateral safety agreements. The GAMA board back 5 years ago had the foresight to be able to start what we call the Electric Propulsion and Innovation Committee. We started out modestly with 11 members of what we call our EPIC committee. And our goal was to be able to gather a lot of these new companies that were exploring this electric and hybrid propulsion, being able to gather them together and work together like traditional GAMA member companies do, to be able to make everyone be able to compete on a level playing field and be able to go and work with the regulators to allow new products to come to market. Well, if you fast forward to 2021 now, that committee has grown now to 103 members, and you can see both established, long-standing general aviation manufacturing companies partnering with government agencies, and a lot of new names and new logos out there on the screen. So it's just truly exciting times, and we are working very vigorously with our regulators to be able to get these aircraft into airspace around the globe. But then it doesn't stop there. If you look at what's happening on another end of the spectrum with supersonic, we're excited about what is happening as we watch the X-59 come together, and what we are going to be able to do with testing of this aircraft to be able to check and see how the public reacts to no longer a supersonic boom, but a rumble in the skies that in most cases is not audible or not above what you would hear for ambient noise like from a road or anything else. So we're excited about this capability. Our companies will take advantage of it, and we have state governments working with us to be able to go and explore this new area of supersonic travel. If you look at what's happening in Kansas right now, the state aviation director working with the government has established an exciting corridor that basically spans the state from east to west, with its heart, the air capital of the world at Wichita, where we'll be able to have these aircraft be able to be tested. But they'll be tested, at least on the civil side, doing things that are sustainably oriented, like running on 100% SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, because we are taking this area of supersonic development seriously in conjunction with environmental sustainability. You'll get there faster, you will burn sustainable aviation fuel, and that all goes into the calculation of emissions that will happen from this new sector of aviation. So back to GAMA's priorities for this year. We've talked about pandemic relief, but we're not just waiting for things to happen. You'll see as I talk about some things happening on Capitol Hill and what we're working on in Brussels as well. We're excited about being able to engage legislators and administration officials to be able to help this industry get back on its feet. We're implementing the new laws that were passed at the end of the last Congress that dealt with certification, safety, and accountability. And we are really focusing on being able to work with global authorities to develop the safety management system framework that allows this SMS systems to be able to be used by both manufacturers and maintenance organizations. We'll touch more on environmental sustainability as we get into our panel, but making our contribution to not only sustainable aviation fuel, but all the elements that deal with sustainability that we were able to talk about last year during this forum continue with great vigor. Innovation and mobility also is part of that sustainability mantra that we have, and you saw all the many designs out there. But our lifeblood is being able to have regulators work with one another, to be able to produce a product in one part of the world and be able to have it used, operated, or integrated into a manufactured product in another part of the world. Also to be able to maintain aircraft, to train air crews and train maintenance personnel. So we've got to have agreements, bilateral safety agreements, with those that have demonstrated their safety competency between nations. And we now have a new player in that, which is the UK, that now will stand back up their UK CAA to be able to operate with bilateral agreements from all of the standard 4 states of design: Canada, Brazil, the US, and Europe. So now I'm going to turn just to the US for a second and take a look at some legislation that we're working hard to be able to promote. We're excited about having, as part of the reconciliation process, some help for manufacturers and maintenance providers. But when I say help, it's not a handout. It's a 50-50 cost share agreement between industry and the U.S. federal government, where we can go and retain these aerospace workers and their expertise within our companies, or in many cases now bringing them back earlier than we could have otherwise. And instead of having some of these workers on unemployment, we bring them back into our factories, keep them in our industry to make sure that they do not go and filter into other industries that have high demand for that type of manufacturing or engineering expertise. So we are very thankful that Senator Cantwell, the new chair of Senate Commerce, Senator Moran, Senator Warner, along with the chairman of our Aviation Subcommittee and T&I, Representative Larson, and Representative Estes from Kansas, all are working together to co-sponsor this legislation, and all of our companies are working vigorously with the U.S. Congress to be able to make sure this is part of reconciliation. But then it doesn't stop there. You will very soon see an announcements about the advanced air mobility legislation that's working through being sponsored in the House by Representative Davids, who co-chairs the Aviation Subcommittee, or she's the second member of the Aviation Subcommittee in the U.S. House of Representatives, and the ranking member, Representative Graves from Louisiana, along with Senator Moran in the Senate, are going to push forward this legislation that what it does, it doesn't go and interrupt what the FAA is already working on very rigorously with being able to certify these aircraft and also to get them in the airspace. But what it does is it goes and brings in these other federal entities, whether it's the Department of Commerce, the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, NASA, the Department of Energy, to be able to look forward and look at the infrastructure this nation needs to be able to go and allow this new electrification of the aviation industry to allow very sustainable transportation. We're very excited and very appreciative for our folks that are working with us very closely on Capitol Hill to push this on. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Michael Malafitano for our panel discussion. And as we get set up, I'd like to introduce the members of that panel. We have, if you go to the next slide, we have our chairman, Nicholas Chaubert, and Michael will be moderating. Our immediate past chairman, Dave Paddock, the president of Jet Aviation. We have Roy Kinzarski, who comes to us as both the CEO of Magnix, but also the executive chairman of Aviation. And last but not least, Tony Lefebvre, who's the chief operating officer for Signature Flight Support and also our new environmental committee chairman. So with that, Michael, I'd like to pass it to you.
Thank you, Pete. This is a very special occasion when the general aviation industry leaders gather to share our views on the challenges and opportunities currently present in the market, as well as we heard, the overall state of the industry. It is also a great opportunity to listen to each other's perspectives and experiences on how to navigate through adversity with confidence and creativity, generating new insights through better managing our businesses globally. Together, it's clear we are stronger, more resilient, and we can lead the way in our industry as we deliver higher value to the entire aviation community. Clearly and definitively, 2020 started a new era. There were unique challenges as well as opportunities that our entire industry and global transportation system had to experience. But challenging scenarios have the tendency to bring out the best in our companies and our people. Crisis and hardship can sometimes turn into and become stimulus for very smart solutions and adapting to ever-increasing innovation. Global players were specifically challenged, especially in their operations, and we heard some of those comments in Pete's remarks, and had to assess the supply chain management process, as well as take care of all of our customers' products, services, and delivery of products in a much different way. Nicholas, I'd like to start with you. You have operations on 2 continents with the TBM and the Kodiak. Can you give us your perspectives on how manufacturers are faring on both sides of the Atlantic?
Yes, Michael, thank you. Well, as Pete said, as we know, the industry has had to adjust and mitigate through the virus transmission in the workplace so that we could continue production, deliveries, and of course, test flights. We've seen in the figures today that GA is very strong, but we are still facing some challenges. I just ferried an aircraft over from France for the purpose of coming and be here in DC. And I was concerned that there is a lot of border restrictions that have been put in place. And in fact, the flying portion is in fact the easiest. This is an example of what can actually be a burden for our industry. We also are seeing that our industry is continuing to be very strong. And we deliver and we helped in the pandemic with the repatriation flights, medical deliveries, and most recently, vaccine deliveries. So we believe that in fact, we're no difference between the 2 worlds, Europe or the US, but still, it seems that it's a century ago that we were all together. So if I look at how I see in a recent survey at GAMA, where a lot of our GAMA members responded, they actually showed us that there is about a loss of revenue about 24%. If you look at the overall economy, it's doing pretty good, and it's probably again there was an estimation. Maybe the numbers based on what we have seen with the figures today are less than that. This is something that we also experience ourselves. Between the 2 companies that are direct, Kodiak and TBM, we see the demand very high. So my concern is only to be able to supply and to have deliveries.
Thank you, Nicholas. Dave, how are you, my friend? Likewise, you have charter, maintenance, completion facilities all over the world, and we know how your travelers and owners have shifted their behaviors. Love to get perspectives from you on the segments you're seeing given the pandemic.
Great. Thanks a lot, Michael. It's a shame I couldn't be there with you. I'm greeting you from Basel, Switzerland today. Well, when COVID hit us, like it has hit many other companies, we had to implement a number of actions to protect our business, our employees, our customers, our staff. Safety, as it is in every one of our companies, is our number 1 priority. So we immediately went there and administered a number of environmental health and safety precautions to do just that. We also rolled out a work from home policy. This is where we deployed technology. We had about 800 or so people working from home in a relatively short period of time. For those people that couldn't work from home, we had contact tracing, social distancing, and other protective measures in place, but proud to say that we were operational every day throughout, and I think the organization as a whole proved to be quite resilient. In some locations, and we're fortunate to have a diverse business. So in some locations, particularly in our maintenance locations, we had a book of business. We had plenty of work to keep us going. In other parts of our business, like the FBO, charter, and aircraft management business, we were more immediately impacted, particularly in the second quarter. And we started to see some recovery in the third quarter. And then that recovery stalled out going into the fourth quarter because of new variants, new strains. And we all had to do a lot of difficult things to survive the last year. I think GAMA did a survey that said over 70% of the survey respondents had to go and make some adjustments to their workforce, whether that's furloughs, hour reductions, closure of facilities, or other similar reductions. It's painful to do that as a leader of an organization. You don't want to have a negative impact on your staff or your customers, but sometimes you need to do what you need to do to make it through to the next day or the next quarter. We also saw a significant impact on supply chain, apart from our FBO business, the aircraft management and charter business, where there really was more of a volume disruption. In our completions business, our maintenance business, we saw an immediate impact on our supply chain. It was just difficult to move parts and materials around the globe. Unfortunately, that continues to this day, and I think it's impacting our ability to, as an industry, the free flow of goods and services is constraining our business. And I'm very much looking forward to when those restrictions are lifted.
Thanks, David. Great perspective. And Tony, I have to say that that's clearly outlining a pretty evolving environment. There's changes happening in the market behaviors clearly leading us to new ways of acting, and in some cases, like for you, new opportunities and avenues for growth. Signature has had no lack of press lately, and all of it seems to signify an interest in future potential growth for the business aviation sector. Love to have you share some perspectives.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. As you hopefully most of you understand, I can't go into any of the details about the pending transaction. However, I'd say broadly what that indicates to many folks in the industry, and certainly what we're seeing, is this, interest in business aviation is strong and certainly announced, from our deal. But it also just demonstrates the amount of people that want to be part of it and see a large future ahead for business and general aviation. And if you were to look sort of specifically, then drill down a little bit to our FBO operations, what we were able to accomplish through what we've been going through the last 14 months, I think is, I'm tremendously proud of the team, and similar to what Dave was referring to. FBOs provided, and the business and general aviation space provided support for PPE distribution, medical equipment. We now are involved in vaccine movement across the world, and we continue to support our communities that we're involved in providing that critical lifeline and timely support. I'd say, one of the things that I've seen happen, and more broadly, we've experienced growth in leisure customers, and certainly customers experiencing business general aviation for their first time. And given the experiences that they've had, we expect and we continue to believe that they are now part of the family and will continue to fly private in the future. And so one of the things that's happened is, we've introduced a lot of people to private aviation. And as a result of it, I think those customers are going to be, continuing to be customers in the future. And so we think that area is an area that will continue to be robust and grow. And we're starting to see the return of business flying, of course, as the various countries, release lockdowns, go into lockdowns, you see sort of a similar pattern. But, mostly now that you're starting to see vaccines starting to take a hold, we're starting to see some good, I'd call it green shoots of growth. And, I guess the summary is overall, we've seen probably 10 years of change in 1 year. A way we approach customer service deliveries, and really just keeping our team members safe. So a lot's happened, a lot more to happen, but I think we're fortunately on the right side of the curve now, and I think we are going to have a fantastic year and looking forward to it.
Great perspectives, Tony, and congrats on the continued growth. All right, folks.
And Michael, if I could interject for a second.
Sure, Roy.
I think one aspect of the pandemic that we all have to remember is it's not only an issue impacting the industry, it's also impacting and creating an accelerant with our consumers, the flying public. People still want to fly. And with on-demand, people still want to have packages, and there's nothing like aircraft to do that. But we may see that because of this pandemic, maybe people don't want to fly in a big airplane, in a commercial airliner. Maybe they want to go more towards the GA aircraft. Maybe they want to fly from smaller airports that are in and around their homes as opposed to going to a large hub with large TSA lines and a lot of people. Maybe they want to have a smaller environmental impact when they fly. And when you look at a lot of companies today and how they've gotten used to remote work, and a lot of companies are saying even post-pandemic, keep working from home, the commute or the notion of a suburban commute may completely be changed. Maybe instead of a daily hour-long drive, we'll start seeing weekly 20-minute flights. And so from that perspective, the whole GA industry and the move to electric and the move to smaller aircraft, smaller airports really could be the future of the way we look at transportation. So just a food for thought.
Well, it's a great food for thought, and it leads us right into the second topic that speaks volumes to bringing that technology to marketplace, and that's certification and validation. The certification and validation of aircraft is central to our industry and all of its sectors. And we do so with multiple authorities all around the world. Electrification, as Roy just indicated, will certainly revolutionize general aviation, and these new solutions may enter the GA market much earlier than commercial airlines. And the certification process is even more challenging. So Roy, Magnix presents an interesting and visionary proposition. Give us some more context and describe your experience of entering the FAA certification process with a product relatively new to the FAA specialists, especially electric propulsion systems.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. And indeed, I agree that electric propulsion is interesting and visionary, as you put it, but I like to say that it's also the future of aviation because we as an industry can't keep creating emissions when we fly. It's just not acceptable anymore, and we have to stop that. And so I will say that while Magnix is leading the way in electric propulsion and the certification of it, we're far from being the first company that's ever introduced new technology. I mean, if you think of the jet engine back in the day, two-person flight decks, fly-by-wire, winglets, all sorts of new technologies that have been introduced throughout the history of aviation, both the industry and the regulatory authorities know how to deal with new technologies, and they know how to deal with the unknowns. What we have found, both from Magnix and Aviation, is that full transparency is essential. At this stage of this industry, of this small electric industry, we, the industry players, are much more knowledgeable about this than the regulators will ever be. It's just a fact. We've been working at this since 2009. Aviation have been doing their aircraft since 2014. So we know much more. And so it's important that at this stage, we as leaders really share in a fully transparent way everything we're doing with the regulatory authority. We tell them and we show them what we're doing, both when it goes right and when it goes wrong. And that's the only way that we can really build trust with the regulators, that when we say something, we mean it and it's true. Moreover, we found that being transparent on an ongoing basis is really a way for the regulator to get exposed to these new technologies and learn from them. This is a way they can get to see why are electric propulsion systems more reliable and better than internal combustion engines. What types of new faults might come from an internal combustion engine that's now going out versus the electric that's coming in. And so being able to be transparent also becomes a learning platform for the regulator. And just on a personal note, I want to add that we've been working with the FAA and Transport Canada for some time. We have found them to be very forward-leaning when it comes to learning these new technologies. They're always asking questions, learning, trying to figure out what's going on, and they're very interested in what's happening. And I found that to be a pleasure. And then, of course, finally, I think it's important that we all, that I stress the importance of organizations like GAMA that are able to speak with the regulators as a single consolidated voice of the industry as we move forward.
Well, it's great perspectives, Roy, and you talked a lot about the strong relationships, the need for collaboration across the authorities, And Nicholas, congratulations to you on the 1,000th TBM. Now more and more we witness jet technologies available at entry-level markets and propeller aircraft. Your two turboprop companies regularly work with these aviation authorities on both sides of the Atlantic. We are truly a global industry that relies on these strong relationships between the regulators. And during 2020, the relationships between the world-leading authorities were very stressed, and yet you had what I understand a pretty smooth process for the validation of Garmin's Autoland with your TBM 940. I'd like to hear what your views are on the relationships and the importance specifically on bilateral safety agreements.
Thank you, Mike. Well, I agree with Roy. I mean, transparency and being a true partner with the agencies is very important. We believe that among the authorities, specifically EASA, FAA, but also their counterpart in Brazil and Canada, it is critical to establish global standards for safety and ensure timely delivery of our aircraft. We also have noticed that during the pandemic, there was some impact during the validation of our project, simply because a design change can be a little bit longer or unpredictable in terms of process. So we absolutely need to encourage our regulators to work together and ensure continued mutual confidence and avoid duplication of the administrative efforts. So if we use this example, as you mentioned about OMSE, I think with Garmin and the other OEMs that certify the emergency Autoland, we have been able to create somehow a synergy so that we went smooth, not only with the FAA, but also we were able to do our counterpart with the EASA. And as a matter of fact, validation process with ANAC has been going smooth. We hope to align a little bit more Transport Canada in that respect. So if I were to add a very important thing, we know that EU and US bilaterals is a global cornerstone of the international aviation safety for promoting and improving safety so that we can continue to exchange of aviation products, parts, repairs, maintenance, and pilot training. We cannot just take one piece isolated. It's all together. So we believe that this bilateral will continue to work effectively with a lot of our aircraft that we are able to propose among the industry and all of the equipment certification programs. But we need to continue to have a very strong relationship and commitment from both FAA and EASA for continued cooperation and collaboration using this bilateral. We at GAMA, we believe that with all of our member company, we can be extremely taking the lead way in that relationship, making sure that we can facilitate and help them to see what are the goods on continuing these collaborations. It's very important that we build those different blocks. But I think I'd like to ask you, Michael, what do you see from Umbra's perspective?
Well, thanks, Nicholas, and great perspectives on collaboration. And we understand very well the challenges of multiple certifications, and we normally work almost simultaneously to approve our products with ANAC, FAA, and EASA. And in our past years, the relationship has been very good. And as a result, we've successfully managed to certify our products on all three authorities virtually at the same time. Triple certification, that is applied to executive products, commercial products, and defense products. This is a direct result of early collaboration with all three regulatory authorities from pre-design to final certification. And interestingly, during the pandemic, you actually saw remote use of collaborative technologies with virtual testing, virtual inspections, and we believe very strongly that this could be built into the process moving forward as an important way to speed up time, reduce costs, and help with the ever important aircraft certification process. Fantastic. Let's shift gears. The next subject is as equally important. It's the high priority for our industry as we move forward. You heard some topics talking about EPIC, and this is our environmental sustainability. The general and business aviation industry has shown we are fully committed to environmental sustainability, and we are addressing it in several approaches, which includes increasing the adoption and availability of sustainable aviation fuels, SAF. Last year, some of us here participated in a very successful Business Aviation Sustainability Summit, which brought together stakeholders to accelerate momentum and reaffirm commitments towards achieving our environmental sustainability goals, most specifically, working to spur the increase in supply and demand for SAF. Tony, as GAMA's Environment Committee Chairman, can you give us some of your insights on how SAF is being accepted across the globe? And most specifically, customer demand as compared to supply capacity.
Excellent. So I'll start with, and thanks, Michael, I'll start with the demand side. We have been rolling it out within Signature for the last year or so. We did do a little bit before that, but within the last year, the demand has been tremendous, and the amount of interest in SAF and the amount of people that want the product is just incredible, and we continue to see that growth exponentially. The problem is it just, demand is currently exceeding the current available capacity in the marketplace. And so for us, we have to, as an industry, really make sure that we are keeping that in the forefront of the increasing production and distribution of SAF across the globe, so we can meet the demand that is currently being generated from lots of different constituents throughout the aviation community. So I'd say more broadly, we need a comprehensive strategy that includes SAF, but it's imperative so we as an industry can help meet the climate change objectives. And that includes focus on things like technology deployment, better managing air traffic, research and development to help reduce overall emissions. And then on top of that, increased usage of sustainable aviation fuels. And obviously sustainability is front and center on both sides of the Atlantic. And as Pete referenced a little bit earlier, we're going to be looking at ways to continue to advance policies that help advance on all fronts of the things that I just discussed in making sure that we are, as an industry, meeting our commitment to climate change.
Thanks, Tony. And David, I have to shift to you. You're right on the front row in Europe, and the debate is front and center that's taking place at the environmental between EU and UK. You've worked on SAF from the start for your facilities in Europe. Love to have your perspectives on how you see this there and abroad.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. It's an interesting perspective because, as you know, I used to live in New Jersey. I moved to Switzerland in 2019, and I saw both sides of how the U.S. and now Europe are dealing with overall environmental and sustainability issues, but particularly the acceptance of sustainable aviation fuel. So sustainability practices are commonplace here in Europe. That's what I've observed since I've come to Switzerland, had the opportunity to move around our European facilities. I'm very proud that we were one of the organizations in Europe that was able to supply sustainable aviation fuel last year's World Economic Forum. Jet aviation, tying back to Tony's comment about supply and demand, has been in this market for about 3 years in total, but there isn't an adequate supply to satisfy the demand. The supply was lower in 2019 than it was in 2020, and it's increasing year over year, but the demand is outpacing that supply. So we're trying to do our part, and what we're trying to do is to promote the availability of fuel at the facilities where we're present. So in Switzerland, making sustainable aviation fuel consistently available at our Zurich and Geneva FBOs. We're also in discussions in Amsterdam to make a permanent supply of sustainable aviation fuel physically available, and also offering things like book and claim schemes and carbon credits to make sustainability, or at least to provide an option for sustainability at those facilities where sustainable aviation fuel isn't already present. We're also doing it in Van Nuys and a few other US locations, but we're just doing part of our role, or playing our role in the global environment of trying to enhance sustainability. It's something I think we all have a role to play.
Great perspectives, and thanks for all your efforts. Nicholas, this reminds us that in the next few weeks we're expecting the European Commission to announce its Refuel EU Aviation Initiative to accelerate production and the use of SAF in Europe. How do you see that going?
Well, we are very excited, Michael, about that. Industry welcomes regulatory initiatives to support this uptake of SAF in various geographies. The EU's flagship initiative in this domain that is called, as you said, Refuel Europe Aviation, we're keen to see how the Commission is going to propose to support this key tool in decarbonizing our industry and significantly increase the availability across Europe. We heard that availability is the issue. I think we passed the time where people want it. Now we need to deliver it. So we invite all present today to attend the first ever European Business Aviation's SF Summit that is going to be on April 20th, which will discuss in depth our industry commitment to SAF and make its uptake a success. It's important for us to lead the way.
Thank you, Nicholas. It's important indeed, and it's important also to note that SAF is only one of the pillars of our industry's commitment to sustainability and reducing carbon emissions. We see our industry investing on sustainability carbon emissions offset programs, but for us to achieve the aviation industry's goal of carbon neutral growth from 2020 on and a 50% reduction of CO2 emissions by 2050, we have some heavy lifting to do in terms of investing in new technologies. Roy, speaking of new technologies, can you expand on electric propulsion and reducing emissions and the dependence on fossil fuels?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the simple answer, of course, is that an electric propulsion system or electric aircraft don't require fuel and don't create emissions. So you've solved the problem. But if you go a little deeper than that, I want to start with stressing that a 50% goal is great, and I love the fact that we have that. But if as an industry we really want to make a long-term dent and to make this planet better for our children and our grandchildren, we all have to work hard as we are to really eliminate emissions altogether, not just from the aircraft, but from the entire value chain that comes up to that aircraft. Electric propulsion, of course, as I mentioned, create zero emissions. But in order to achieve zero emissions in the future, or even get to 50% emissions, there are really two pillars we see that have to be in place to eliminate that. And they both have to be in place. The first is we have to have the technology to do so. Aviation history has taught us that propulsion leads the way to step changes in efficiency of aircraft and aircraft design. You mentioned earlier that we live in the jet age of aviation. That's not because of the jet aircraft, that's because of the jet engine. It was the jet engine that enabled new designs, more efficient designs, etc. And we see the same thing having to happen with electric propulsion. That's why magniX had to start with electric propulsion systems, because without them, you could not design new efficient aircraft from the ground up. And now we're well down that path, flying aircraft, etc. So we're seeing new aircraft designs being introduced, be it the Aviation Alice, rotorcraft, eVTOLs, the air taxis, all sorts of new amazing designs that were shown earlier that use and take advantage of these lightweight yet powerful and reliable electric propulsion systems. And then finally, of course, is the value chain that's required for the source of those electrons, be it battery, hydrogen fuel cells, or as I like to say, a bunch of hamsters turning really fast on a wheel. Those source of electrons continue to develop, mostly thanks to electric cars that are fairly prevalent today in the United States, let alone worldwide. And we're seeing a lot of development in different battery technologies and chemistries, be it lithium ion, lithium sulfur, lithium metal, solid state. We're also seeing new solutions like supercapacitor energy, and of course, hydrogen fuel cells, which are an exciting aspect of larger aircraft, like what we're working on converting a Dash 8 with universal hydrogen. So technology and its existence has to be the first pillar. But then the second pillar has to be in place, and that is that this amazing electric aircraft technology has to be a better business case than what it is today with fossil fuels. If it's not affordable, then the environmental story alone is not good enough, I'm afraid. With 40 to 80% reduced operating costs per flight hour, and zero emissions, clearly electric aviation will provide that business case. But it's really important to remember, it can't just be about the environment. It has to make sense financially for the operators. Now, the beauty of electric is that it's zero emission at the point of use. But the nice thing about electricity is that the grid keeps getting more and more renewable itself. So as opposed to taking oil out of the ground or wherever we get it, and then taking it through various processes and taking it on tankers and trucks and going through all the processes to make it into fuel, and it will always remain its same self, electricity is becoming greener and greener. Washington State is over 75% electric. New Hampshire is over 90% electric. Even the great oil state of Texas is over 60% renewable. And so when you look at the electric grid itself is becoming more and more renewable, and airports can become microgrids of their own, be it wind farms, solar, et cetera. The airport can suddenly be self-sufficient. So the beauty of what we're excited about in electric aviation is that it really addresses the entire value chain.
Great perspectives, Roy. And Tony, obviously you heard a lot of pillars in regards to technologies, and Signature was recently recognized for its corporate initiatives to address global sustainability by the Carbon Disclosure Project and your program Signature Renew, emphasizing sustainability at every level. Can you tell us about environmental stewardship that's taking place at Signature?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I think, as we started, taking a very close look at what we do as a business, one of the things we recognized, for us to be able to really affect change, we were going to need a full commitment from the board and CEO and et cetera, our entire leadership team. And a few years back, we came up with a plan that addressed not only just, how do we bring sustainable aviation fuel to the market, but how do we address Scope 1, 2, and 3, and really put a plan in place that starts to address each one of those as individual items and ensure that we are taking actions on those things. So if you were to look specifically at SAF, we talked a little bit about, but we continue to be really focused in on not only bringing SAF to the market, but until demand, and like Dave was saying, until demand can meet, supply can meet demand, we're putting in offset mechanisms, and those offset mechanisms will allow our customers to effectively fly carbon neutral, and hopefully we'll need less of those in the future as sustainable aviation fuel comes online. But beyond that, as an organization, we like to say we were looking at our entire carbon footprint, and we operate a lot of gas vehicles, and so we have plans to replace all of the vehicles that are capable of being replaced right now. Unfortunately, fuel trucks are not electrified yet, and there's some folks that are out developing electrified fuel vehicles, but they don't exist today. And so we offset those vehicles and the diesel they burn with biofuels. But our hope is eventually they will become electrified too, and I think that's very near within the next few years. We also look at our power generation and how do we support. We run 10 plus million square feet of hangar space. We put solar panels on those roofs, and I'm happy to say we are committing more solar power than we need to sustain and operate our hangar footprints, and we're putting power back into the grid. So we're using our our large geographic footprints to generate electricity to support our needs. But because we operate massive hangar facilities, they tend to produce a lot more than we actually need. So we're able to put green energy back into the various markets we operate, and again, support the communities. So it's really not only just looking at how do we supply SAF to our customers, it's this holistic view. And that's what got us the high score with the Carbon Disclosure Project. And so we're very pleased with that, and we look forward to continuing to focus in not only just on one aspect of our environmental footprint, but others.
Well, it shows full commitment for sure, and Embraer is one of the companies as well in the aviation to comply with the international standard for designing and implementing an environment management system. Ever since we've continuously worked on improving our products, production processes, waste management, energy consumption, and the list goes on. Moving forward, Embraer has plans in the short term to invest more heavily in offsetting its carbon emissions, as well as intensifying the use of SAF. And in the mid to long term, the target is to obtain a carbon neutral operation and even more efficient and clean products throughout the entire life cycles, recycles products, upcycled interior parts and components, advances in avionics such as RNP and ADS-B, as well as airframe optimizations. Zero carbon operation is our goal, and for that we continue searching for cleaner sources of energy. Electrification and hydrogen are some of these technologies that may become more present in aviation as we move forward. We also believe that zero carbon operation needs to go beyond our gates and include downstream to our suppliers and upstream to our end users. It's ambitious, but most aircraft today are quieter, more fuel efficient, indicating that aviation can transform itself through innovation. It is great to see the commitment all of you have just shared with us on sustainability and as we move forward throughout the sectors of the industry. Now we're running tight on time, so we only have, as they call it, the lightning round. It's the last question, but I'd be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about workforce and workforce development, specifically having a diverse and highly skilled workforce. Pete talked about the resilience and the courage of our workforce through the pandemic and how it's going to be needed to, fuel us and power us through the recovery. As we look into the future, it's important that we showcase diverse jobs in our industry and what they have to offer. It's more than pilots, it's more than mechanics and technicians, it's engineers, it's accountants, it's specialists, it's programmers, public relations, management. So the question to you all, do you all agree with that? Yes? No? Any thoughts? Dave?
If I may.
Yeah, I'll go. We're fortunate that we're already a fairly diverse organization, Michael. We've got 70 nationalities across 4,000 people for Jet Aviation worldwide. So we look at diversity as a core strength, and I think it's important to have a diversity of opinion as well. So we started a few years ago looking at the UN Sustainable Development Goals, gender equality, work and economic growth, reducing inequalities, and have a number of initiatives underway to support that, increasing women in leadership, driving programs to support and foster learning and innovation. There is so much that this industry can do to support diversity and to support future well-paying jobs for younger people. We could go on for hours, but it's a fantastic industry. I would welcome every young person to join it and come to work as excited as I do every day.
Thanks, Dave. Roy, you had something to add. You want to
I was just going to say, every day in aerospace, we defy the laws of gravity, which is unbelievable. We make the impossible possible. And every day, every aerospace company combines in one product every single discipline of engineering, math, science, finance, marketing, all of it. No other industry allows that for an employee. And so aerospace is one of the most high-tech, exciting, dynamic, ever-changing industries anyone could ever dream of working in. It behooves us now to really impair that and teach that to the younger generation. It isn't just about Amazon, Microsoft, Google, which are all great companies, but very single product or single aspect software. We're talking about a multidisciplinary, multifaceted industry, which is just a pleasure to work in every day.
Well, I tell you, I am honored to have the opportunity to facilitate this panel with such great minds on general aviation industry. And what you heard was pretty bold. Right? These are folks leading the way in their sectors. So it's not about when are we going to get back to normal. It's about reshaping and reforming the industry to new growth and how to create that growth. Despite the headwinds, looking for ways to overcome, looking for ways to grow, looking for ways to prosper, and really focusing on the human elements, of which workforce is just one of many, and recognizing how important it is that we're at this inflection point and more human elements are going to drive the industry. Just like courage and resilience propelled us through the pandemic and will continue to allow us to flourish. So we need to reimagine, don't just respond. We need to be bold and innovative, addressing complexity with simplicity, and obviously try to speed up products and services to the marketplace. Clearly, as leaders, it's always about walking the talk, being out there, being more productive, sometimes being more vulnerable so that you can be empathetic and emotional to all the needs of your customers, value chain suppliers. And as this industry continues to evolve, it's only going to be the smartest and strongest that will continue to survive the fast-paced activities that we have ahead. I tell you, it's been a personal thanks to all of you, our distinguished panelists, for participating in this great discussion. Our industry is certainly resilient and no doubt will prosper. Pete, now it's back to you.
Well, thanks, Michael. And I just want to say to our panelists, the day cannot come too soon where we can be back together in person, have a beer together, and start talking about all these issues. You guys did a great job. Thank you so much. I think Andre is telling me we have time for a question, and I never use a teleprompter, so I'm going to try to read it. And unfortunately, I can't tell who asked it, but I guess if you start rolling it, Andre, I can. Can you expand on the differences between what was going on in the fourth quarter in terms of deliveries compared to earlier in the year? Any comments on infrastructure? Keep rolling. Okay, that's another question. Okay. So from my perspective, just looking at it, quarter two, boom, things stopped. And now we had to go reconstitute, and all of our panelists talked about the importance of the supply chain. And when people, I don't think, realized prior to the pandemic how much cargo is carried in the bellies of a lot of those airliners that travel around the globe. So if the airlines aren't flying and all of a sudden consumer products are being ordered out the yin-yang from the different distributors and filling up other aircraft that are out there, cargo-specific aircraft, and, oh, by the way, mom and pop industries just can't operate because their national rules or their local governments say you got to stay home, can't even go to the factory. Until we got all of that sorted out, things just stopped. And then things started gradually coming back online. But still, we always talk about the whip, and this whip and the mom and pop suppliers are out on the end of the supply chain. Well, it's almost inverse right now. If the mom and pop at the end of the whip can't produce their product because they can't go to work or they can't get the raw material to be able to make it, and as they go up the chain, and now the OEM doesn't have that piece of product because we work in just-in-time delivery of parts and pieces, all of a sudden we cannot supply the demand that Nicholas talked about that we feel is out there very strongly and what the fourth quarter indicated. So Nicholas or Michael, you want to add to that?
If I may add to it, Pete, I believe that we have worked to circumnavigate in the first part of the year. We were, in fact, at stop, and we lost weeks of production. What is incredible is in the latter part of the year, we were in fact at a higher rate of production than normal. So if we were to combine all of this, we would have had record year almost at any level and any manufacturer. So we have better managed the second part of the year than the first part of the year because it was an unknown for everybody. So we have learned in the second part. That explains, in fact, the difference between the two part of those figures, in the latter part of the year.
And what I would add is that it's important to recognize you have to right-size production and work very closely with your supply chain. We talked a lot about the challenges that the supply chain had during the pandemic with the travel bans and issues related to part shortages for all of the marketplace. But we were able to successfully right-size production. So we sold out of every single aircraft, building backlog, having no carryovers. And that's a big part of the strength and health, is ability to adapt, to recognize in advance, trying to understand what the drivers are to the marketplaces that you serve, with the products that you serve. And we've fared very well in that regard. And I think that is a big testimony to coming out of what might have been a different environment back in the financial crisis of 2008 and the impact on the industry to what we just went through here with the pandemic. I think all of the OEMs, all the suppliers were able to much more readily adapt to the reality of the marketplace, and that has created the health going into 2021.
Next question up is any comments on the infrastructure distribution readiness for SAF at regional airports? And I know, Nicholas, we were talking last night, you and I know Dave Paddock had some considerable challenges in Europe just making it available at some of your facilities there. Can you talk about what you've tried to do?
Well, basically, our fuel provider today is having some difficulties to bring us the the fuel that we will require for our reception flights and all our flights that will be conducted out of the factory in France. So we are highly motivated to, in fact, have a little drop in this big game, which is 200,000 liters. But we are actually short of getting these smaller airports with the supply, as Dave was pointing out. So I think that we need to keep pushing and make sure that those infrastructure are going to happen, and we get the big, I would say, distributors and of course producers of fuel to deliver the fuel that we all think is the right way to look at our future of general aviation.
And of course, SAF is tied very closely with, or our ability to get it is also our giant colleague in the commercial airline industry. So a lot of times we have to partner at the airport level. I know, Tony, you're doing something at SFO that's exciting, that ties in both commercial and business aviation into availability there, that then perhaps springboards us to an ability to use book and claim until we start to get this availability at the regional airports. Any comments you want to make there?
Yeah, Pete, I'd say the chances of every airport having SAF in the future actual physical product is pretty low. The chances of having the availability to book and claim it is very high. And the way we'll do that is we'll bring it in to a place like San Francisco, where we actually use the airport's fuel infrastructure, and it goes into the tanks that are used for the commercial along with the business and general aviation. And that allows that product to be burned. And as a result of it, then that credit can be then sold to someone in a small airport, regional airport, where it wouldn't make sense to ship in a half load of jet fuel for one customer that demands it. This will be a much more efficient process, and it'll allow us to effectively bring SAF globally and to everyone that wants it.
Thank you. Well, our last question, what are the indicators to watch to see progress of the industry's recovery? Michael, why don't I start with you?
Yeah, great question, Pete. We're watching behaviors. Behaviors are changing. The buyers are no longer asking the questions that they would normally ask about the aircraft in terms of performance. They're focused on how clean it is. They're focused on the air quality. So having HEPA filters on the Praetor aircraft, as an example, having the lowest pressure in the cabin to be able to have more fresh air in the air, trying to focus on Micro Shield 360 and cleaning your aircraft, because these are the kinds of sentiment questions that our buyers are clearly speaking about. The second area is there's been a resurgence from the bottom. We've seen that in terms of the turboprop and piston marketplace that Nicholas had commented on earlier, but you're seeing also all access, whether it be fractional, jet card, whether it's the membership programs, the democratization of the segments. These first-time buyers need to be educated. So you're spending a lot of time introducing the entire company, the brand, the products, the services, the support of this sector versus continuing to work with the same existing customer base. So we're very excited about the resurgence and growth from the bottom, and we're well positioned to take advantage of that.
Dave, from your charter business, obviously the more people fly in charter, the more aircraft we're selling to the charter organizations in that. What do you see as, what are your indicators that you're looking for recovery there in the charter operations?
Well, what I think we're looking at is the broad macro trends of what's happening from a COVID infection rate, vaccination rates, opening up borders between, for example, the US and Europe, and consistency of those application of those restrictions or rules. But in terms of the charter and the aircraft management markets, our business aircraft operations businesses, we've seen an increase in activity. We've seen an increase in purchases of used or new airplanes, more new customers getting into those airplanes. So our expectation, Pete, is when borders start to reopen, you're going to see an increase in activity that, and it could be above where we were in the past, but still an increase in activity, new customers using their airplanes differently than they did before. Maybe more leisure, less business, but overall an increase in aircraft utilization.
And Roy, to your segment of the industry, as these companies develop you're putting demands on the supply chain, but you're also, from my observation, there's a lot of investment coming into that area of the marketplace. So I don't know if you could give us our perspectives. Have you seen a dip in the interest in your segment of the industry during this pandemic, or as it continues steady state, or is it accelerating?
It's interesting. Overall, the industry from an electric perspective, be it eVTOL, the vertical takeoff and landing, traditional middle mile flights, fixed wing aircraft, overall it's increased. If you look at where we were middle 2019 to where we are today, there are more companies delving into this. There are more companies raising significant amounts of money. There are more companies going public. Where we have seen a significant dip is all the incumbents. The large existing OEMs have all but pulled out of electric aviation or any innovation. And so really what we're seeing is when things become tough, the large incumbents have kind of gone back naturally to their products and their services that we're familiar with that can provide them with income, and they're dropping the innovation or the future. And it's all the small companies coming in and filling those gaps that exist in terms of bringing this new technology forward. And at some point in the next year, 2 years, I'm sure it'll stabilize as well.
Well, it's absolutely a dynamic time, and again, I want to thank you all for joining us. I do want to put a reminder up, if you'll put our slide up for the SAF Summit in Europe. This is going to be a very important one where we're going to have a lot of discussions. I know that I have a lot of my buddies and good friends from the other associations that are on this video conference. They're going to be represented there, so we are excited about what is in front of us with SAF. It should not be missed that one of our great companies tested an engine running on total SAF, so not at all a blend, but complete SAF, which bodes well for a future where we can all be flying with sustainable fuel, and as Roy talked about, with capabilities for electric propulsion. So with that, I'd like to conclude this state of the industry and give thanks to the GAMA staff, but most importantly, give thanks to all of you for helping this industry remain resilient. And I look forward to whatever show, the sooner we get back together again and get those shots in our arms so that we can go and see each other and continue to be able to grow this industry, the better off our lives will all be. So thank you again, and thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Vice Chairman.
Thank
Welcome,
you,
Pete.
Pete. Thank you, Michael.